measure engagement, right? There's a lot of different tools out there. There's a lot of different ways that we can say, all right, I kind of get if an employee is engaged or not. It's hard to put your finger on sometimes. But what are some of the criteria, or as we may say through a survey, some dimensions that we look at to help identify levels of engagement?
Yeah, and hasn't this become such an interesting topic as we have more and more distributed workforces? I talk to so many clients that they're really struggling because you used to be able to walk in and tell almost the energy in the room, right? And that gave us at least some insight into how engaged my employees are. But in distributed workforces, we really need to start measuring, organizational effectiveness. Do I know what's expected of me? How are things communicated to me? If I'm to evaluate the leadership direction, are employees able to articulate that and really know that they're behind that? What's the engagement like with my supervisor? Have I had the appropriate training and tools? So those are some of the dimensions that we look at in an employee survey that really gives us a more broad look into the entire story of the employee experience.
What are different ways that we can look at demographics when looking and going through survey data?
Yeah, this is an important point for your survey. Demographics really are what get to the really meat of the story. What I mean by that is at the highest level, you may be coming out like above average to the national average. But when you start breaking things down, and let's take communication. I had a survey where across the board, everybody says, I find out about changes in a timely manner. Everyone scored above average except for their IT team. And their IT team said, I never have enough time. Well, that's a really great piece of feedback to say, hey, when we're making decisions, it sounds like IT might need a little bit more lead time to be able to properly execute what we're asking of them. And that turns into a really easy conversation, right? That leadership can go to the head of IT, get some more information, ask some more questions. And so that's just one example of demographics. So another example of demographics that I love is looking at the tenure of the employee, because a lot of times as we're instituting change, we think that everybody's on board and we've communicated things well, but especially if you're in a rapidly growing organization, pulling the demographic of tenure is really, really important because a lot of times what comes out in that data is you have new hires that are really confused and people that have been there for a long time are like, oh yeah, I've got this. Or you have the inverse, where the new hires are getting a ton of onboarding training, they're being caught up to speed on everything, but how you're trying to communicate to the rest of the organization isn't landing with as much impact. And so that gives us an opportunity to really look at how are we engaging with our employees that come in and do a great job and know what they're doing to make sure they're aware of changes and that sort of thing. And then another interesting demographic that we all, I think, are encountering is this work from home component. Most of us, when the pandemic hit, didn't have a work from home policy, mainly because we had determined that would be too hard to manage. Well, we learned a lot in 2020 and we realized we can manage that, but how did that impact employee engagement? And so being able to pull out a demographic and then comparing that through the dimensions, especially supervisor effectiveness, leadership effectiveness, communication, and being able to compare that data between maybe some employees who are working from home versus people that are in the office, it will start to just shine a lot of light on your process and how people feel supported when they're not coming into the office every day.
So what are some key contributors as we talk about moving engagement to another level, right? And saying, all right, we've measured it. Now we've got some data. What's next, right? I can ask the question, so what, right? If you could answer, so what are some of those next steps or next factors that come into play?
Well, Kris, I love that question. So what? Because if we're not answering that after we are testing engagement with our employees, we're missing a huge opportunity and we can actually do harm. So the so what is being able to take that story and put an action plan behind it. So if our survey, which it often does, says that we're lacking communication, let's really evaluate what those communication channels look like and be able to share with the employees, hey, we heard we need to communicate better. We're opening a two-way dialogue and here's how we're trying to improve. Continue giving us feedback. And so I think that's the so what, is just to let people know they were heard. I think so often we overlook that as being one of the most important things that we can provide to our employees, is just a way that they can feel heard in the process.